My daughter kicked me out of my own house, shouting, "My husband's family is going to live here now, so get out." I asked, "Where?" She replied coldly, "Go to the dump." So I went, smiling because I knew it wasn't an escape, but a tactical retreat to carry out my plan. Within a week, they lost everything: their home, their money, their happiness. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The phone rang just as I finished washing my lunch dishes. The shrill tone cut through the afternoon silence of my empty house, making me jump slightly. My hands were still damp when I reached for it, recognizing Charlotte's number on the screen. My heart lifted. She hadn't called in 2 months. Dad? Her voice sounded different somehow, sweeter than usual. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. "Charlotte, honey," I couldn't hide my excitement. "You're never interrupting. It's so good to hear your voice." She laughed, but it felt rehearsed. "I have a surprise for you. We're coming over tonight. Michael and I, along with his parents. We want to have a conversation with you." I set down the dish towel, my engineer's mind automatically calculating. "Tonight? That's wonderful. I haven't seen you in so long. Should I make dinner? I could pick up that wine you like, the Pinot Noir from that little vineyard we visited." "Don't worry about food, Dad." Her tone became firmer. "Just be ready for us around 7. "This is important." Something in her voice made me pause, but my loneliness overrode my caution. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make sure everything's perfect. Will you be staying the night? I can prepare the guest rooms." "We'll see how the evening goes." She cut me off gently. "I have to run now, but we'll see you at 7 sharp, okay?" The line went dead before I could ask more questions. I stood holding the phone, replaying her words. A surprise. A conversation. The phrase felt oddly formal, but maybe she was finally ready to bridge the gap that had grown between us since her mother died. Maybe this was the reconciliation I'd been hoping for. I glanced at my watch. 2:45 p.m. 4 hours to prepare. The house suddenly felt alive with possibility. I walked through each room with renewed purpose, seeing it through Charlotte's eyes. The living room needed vacuuming. The bathroom required fresh towels. I moved with the systematic precision that had served me well through 40 years of engineering projects. First, I drove to the grocery store on Cedar Avenue. The March air was crisp, promising spring but still holding winter's edge. I selected a bouquet of yellow daffodils, Charlotte's favorite since childhood, and added a bottle of the Pinot Noir she'd mentioned loving last Christmas. In the bakery section, I found individual chocolate tarts, the kind she used to beg for during our weekend trips to Powell's Books. Back home, I arranged the flowers in my wife's crystal vase, the one Charlotte had always admired. The afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window made them glow like small suns. I set the dining room table with our good china, the set we'd bought for special occasions that had become too rare. While wiping down the counters, I found myself humming, something I hadn't done in months. The house felt different, expectant. I pulled out old photo albums, thinking we might look through them together. There was Charlotte at 5, gap-toothed and grinning in her yellow dress. Charlotte at 16, rolling her eyes at my camera but smiling despite herself. Charlotte on her wedding day, radiant in white silk. I paused at that last photo. Michael stood beside her, handsome in his rented tuxedo, but something about his smile had always seemed hollow to me. His parents flanked them. Robert, with his practiced businessman's grin, Margaret with her perpetual look of mild disapproval. They'd never quite accepted me, the simple engineer who'd worked his way up from nothing. But tonight would be different. Tonight we were family coming together. I showered and put on my best casual shirt. The blue one Charlotte said brought out my eyes. In the mirror, I saw a man trying to look younger than his 62 years, hope making his face brighter. My gray hair was neatly combed, my expression optimistic. At 6:30, I did a final walkthrough. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh flowers. The wine was breathing on the sideboard. The chocolate tarts waited on bone china plates. Everything was ready for whatever surprise my daughter had planned. I settled into my favorite chair by the window, watching for headlights on Maple Street. The anticipation felt like Christmas morning, that delicious tension of waiting for something wonderful to unfold. Outside, the streetlights began flickering on in the gathering dusk. 7 o'clock was only minutes away. Car doors slammed outside. I checked my reflection one last time in the hallway mirror, smoothing my hair. Through the frosted glass, I could see 4 silhouettes approaching my front door. My heart hammered with anticipation. I opened the door before they could knock, my face breaking into what I hoped was a welcoming smile. "Charlotte! Michael!" Charlotte stood on my doorstep in a black coat that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Her face was composed, distant. No smile. No hug. "Hello, Dad." Her voice carried none of the warmth from our phone call. Michael pushed past her, reeking of alcohol. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw set in an aggressive line. Behind them, Robert and Margaret Miller flanked my doorway like bodyguards in expensive coats. Come in, come in. I've prepared dinner. Open that wine you love. We won't be staying for dinner." Margaret Miller swept into my living room without invitation, her sharp eyes already cataloging my furniture, my belongings. She touched my wife's crystal vase dismissively. "Such cheap flowers." I blinked, confused. I bought Charlotte's favorites. "The daffodils." "Dad, we need to talk." Charlotte finally looked at me, but her eyes were cold as January rain. "Sit down." Robert Miller had pulled out his phone and was photographing my kitchen, my dining room. The camera clicked methodically. I watched him, bewildered. What's he doing? "Assessing the property value," Margaret said matter-of-factly. She settled into my wife's favorite chair like she owned it. "Now my son's family will live here, so get out." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the back of the sofa. "What? I don't understand." "Where? This is my house. I've lived here 30 years. Charlotte's voice cut through my protest like ice. "Go to the dump if you want. We need this house." Michael stepped closer, his breath sharp with whiskey. "We already arranged things with the police. Don't make trouble." I stared at my daughter, searching her face for any trace of the child I'd raised, the woman I'd loved unconditionally. Nothing. She looked at me like I was a stranger. Worse, like I was an obstacle. "Charlotte, sweetheart, I don't understand what's happening. Is this about money? If you need help? You're leaving tonight." Margaret's voice brooked no argument. "We'll give you 1 hour to pack essentials." My legs gave out. I sank into the sofa, my mind reeling. The chocolate tarts sat untouched on the dining table. The wine breathed uselessly in its crystal decanter. Everything I'd prepared with such hope seemed to mock me now. "This is my home," I whispered. Robert Miller finished his photography and slipped his phone away. "Not anymore. Charlotte is our daughter-in-law. Family takes care of family." The irony wasn't lost on me. I looked around the room, at 4 decades of memories, at the life I'd built with my late wife, at the home where I'd raised Charlotte with such love. Now they stood in my living room, like invaders, dividing up my existence. I studied Charlotte's face one more time. This woman who'd called me 6 hours ago, who'd spoken of surprises and conversations, who'd let me believe, for one afternoon, that I mattered. Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something much more dangerous. Calculation. "All right," I said quietly. The room went silent. They'd expected tears, pleading, desperation. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Michael's aggressive posture faltered slightly. I stood up, walked to the closet, and pulled out my old leather briefcase. "I'll pack some things." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. They'd expected tears, begging, maybe rage. Instead, I moved to my bedroom with the methodical precision that had served me through 40 years of engineering projects. I pulled my worn suitcase from the closet shelf. The leather was cracked, but the latches still worked perfectly. Everything had its purpose, its proper place. "All right, I'll go." My voice surprised them, calm, measured. But remember, I've been an engineer my whole life. I know how to build things. I folded my best shirts with mechanical precision, but I also know how to tear them down. Charlotte shifted uncomfortably. "What do you mean by that?" I looked up from my packing, meeting her eyes for the first time since their arrival. "Nothing, daughter. Just wishing you happiness in your new home." From the living room, Margaret's voice carried sharp and victorious, finally showing some sense. I continued packing. Bank statements from the filing cabinet. Insurance papers. The deed to the house, though what good it would do me now, I couldn't say. Behind them, my engineering certifications and professional references. 40 years of careful documentation. Charlotte lingered in the doorway, watching me work. Perhaps some small part of her felt guilt. But when Michael called her name from the kitchen, she turned away. I packed Helen's photograph last, the one from our anniversary dinner 3 years ago. Her smile radiated warmth that seemed impossible in this cold house full of strangers who shared my blood. 20 minutes. That's all it took to pack a lifetime. I wheeled the suitcase through the living room where my family, former family, watched me like vultures observing dying prey. Robert had resumed photographing, now focusing on the more expensive pieces. Margaret sat in Helen's chair, already arranging throw pillows differently. The utilities are in my name, I said quietly. You'll need to transfer them. We'll handle everything, Robert replied without looking up from his phone. I paused at the front door, studying the faces of people I'd loved, supported, sacrificed for. Charlotte avoided my gaze. Michael swayed slightly, reaching for the wine I'd opened in celebration. Margaret examined my wife's crystal collection with calculating eyes. Well then, I adjusted my grip on the suitcase handle. I suppose this is goodbye. None of them responded. The evening air felt sharp against my face. March in Portland carried winter's last bite, but something about the cold cleared my thoughts. I loaded the suitcase into my Honda's trunk, the car Helen and I had bought together 5 years ago. Still reliable. Still serving its purpose. I drove through familiar neighborhoods that no longer felt like home. Past the elementary school where I'd dropped Charlotte off countless mornings, past the park where we'd celebrated her graduation, past the grocery store where I'd shopped for tonight's rejected dinner. The ATM glowed harsh white in the parking lot of a 24-hour convenience store. I inserted my card with steady fingers, checking my account balance, pension deposits, Social Security. Savings accumulated over decades of careful living. Not wealthy, but sufficient. More than they'd expected, probably. The Sunrise Inn sat along a commercial strip 15 minutes from my former neighborhood. Budget accommodations, but clean. The desk clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, processed my registration without curiosity. Cash payment for 3 nights. Room 237. The room smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and contained everything necessary for temporary survival. Single bed, small table, television, bathroom with thin towels and tiny soap bars. I sat on the bed's edge and opened my laptop. Time to solve a problem. Morning light filtered through the motel's thin curtains, harsh and unfamiliar. For a moment, I forgot where I was, then yesterday's betrayal. Crashed back like cold water. I opened my laptop and logged into my online banking. The numbers glowed steady on the screen. Pension deposits, Social Security, decades of careful savings, more than enough for what I needed to do. Then I accessed the joint account Charlotte and I had opened when she was 16. Her first checking account. With my name still listed as co-owner, she'd never removed me. Probably forgot it existed. The balance made me smile for the first time in 24 hours. 30 years I gave and gave and gave. I murmured to the empty room. Time to take back everything that belongs to me. I closed the laptop and showered in the motel's cramped bathroom. The hot water felt like clarity itself. No more confusion, no more hurt feelings. Just engineering precision applied to a very specific problem. By 9:30, I was standing in Techmart's fluorescent bright aisles. The young clerk with purple hair barely looked up from her phone. I need a prepaid phone, I told her. Something basic, and a cheap laptop for travel. She led me to the electronics wall, pointing out options with practiced boredom. I selected a simple flip phone and a basic laptop, both paid for in cash. No credit cards, no digital trail, linking back to Norman Ross. Setting up a home office? She asked, making conversation while ringing up the purchase. Remote work, I replied. Consulting. Close enough to the truth. The real estate office occupied a converted house on Division Street. Sarah Martinez, according to her nameplate, looked up from her computer with the bright smile of someone who lived on commission. How can I help you today? I need a modest apartment, 1 bedroom, month-to-month lease if possible. I settled into the chair across from her desk. I work online, so good internet is essential. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Budget range? I named a figure that made her smile widen. Not extravagant, but comfortable. The kind of tenant landlords preferred. I have several options. This unit on Hawthorne has fiber optic internet. Perfect for remote work. When would you like to move in? Today, if possible. She blinked. That's ambitious. But I like ambition. Let me make some calls. 2 hours later, I signed a lease for a clean one-bedroom apartment, 12 blocks from my former home. Close enough for reconnaissance, far enough to avoid accidental encounters. Sarah handed me the keys with professional efficiency. The internet should be active by tomorrow morning. Anything else you need to know about the neighborhood? Just where to find good coffee. She laughed and recommended 3 cafes within walking distance. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and industrial carpet. Empty rooms echoed with possibility. I set my suitcase in the bedroom and unpacked my laptop on the kitchen counter. The afternoon sun slanted through clean windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny plans taking shape. I opened my new laptop and began making lists. Resources available. Timeline requirements. Information needed. Phase 1. Objectives. Outside, Portland hummed with the ordinary business of ordinary people, living ordinary lives. Inside, I began building something extraordinary, something they would never see coming. I pulled out my phone, my old phone, and scrolled through Charlotte's contact information. Her work number, Michael's cell, the Miller family's home address, which was now my former address. So much information, so many vulnerabilities. I cracked my knuckles and started typing. Wednesday morning arrived with the methodical precision I'd always applied to complex engineering projects. My apartment had transformed overnight into something resembling a command center. 4 manila folders sat arranged on the kitchen table, each labeled with a name: Charlotte, Michael, Robert, Margaret. I opened my laptop and began filling in what I already knew. Charlotte's work address, her favorite lunch spots, her predictable routines. Michael's construction job site and his after-work patterns. The Miller parents' temporary address, my former address. But knowledge gaps remained. I needed specifics, vulnerabilities, pressure points. Thursday evening found me nursing a ginger ale at the Riverside Casino's bar. The bartender, a chatty woman named Linda with graying roots, kept the conversation flowing as naturally as the drinks she poured. "That guy Michael comes here often?" I asked, nodding toward the blackjack tables where my son-in-law sat hunched over his cards. "Oh, yeah." Linda's eyes followed my gaze. "Lost quite a bit here these past weeks. Says he'll pay up soon when he sells a house." I sipped my ginger ale, watching Michael's increasingly desperate gestures as his chips disappeared. "Sounds like he's confident about that sale." "Hope so, for his sake." Linda lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Some of these guys don't like waiting, if you know what I mean." Michael stumbled slightly, getting up from the table, his face flushed with alcohol and frustration. I photographed him from across the room with my new camera's zoom lens. Clear shots of his condition, his behavior, his companions. Evidence. Friday morning, I followed Michael to his construction site downtown. He worked for Henderson Development, a mid-sized company with offices in a glass building on 3rd Avenue. At 11:30, he emerged for what appeared to be an extended lunch break. He wasn't alone. The woman was perhaps 30, auburn-haired, wearing a tailored business suit that suggested she earned more than Michael ever would. They walked close together, his hand occasionally touching her back in a way that spoke of intimacy rather than friendship. I photographed them from across the street, their body language, her hand on his arm, the kiss she gave him before they parted ways at her car. More evidence. That afternoon, I visited the Multnomah County Clerk's office. Public records revealed the scope of Robert Miller's financial catastrophe with clinical precision. Failed investment in a restaurant chain. Tax liens totaling $43,000, a business license that had been suspended for non-payment of state fees. The Miller family wasn't just desperate, they were drowning. Back in my apartment that evening, I spread the photographs across my kitchen table alongside printed documents and handwritten notes. Michael's gambling debts and promises about house sale proceeds, his affair with someone who clearly had money to lose if exposed. Robert's tax troubles and suspended business license, Margaret's complete dependence on her husband's already compromised income. Each folder now contained enough ammunition to destroy its subject completely. I leaned back in my chair, studying the evidence with an engineer's satisfaction. Structural weaknesses identified. Load-bearing points located. The foundation of their victory over me had more cracks than they realized. My phone buzzed, the old phone with Charlotte's contact information still intact. Time to begin the demolition. Saturday morning brought the same methodical clarity I'd always applied to structural engineering problems. I spread the intelligence files across my kitchen table once more, this time not for analysis, but for action sequence planning. Charlotte first. Financial pressure would create immediate panic. Robert second. Government investigation would consume his already limited resources. Michael third. His gambling debts and affair provided multiple pressure points. Margaret fourth. Her complete dependency meant she'd collapse when the others fell. By 10:30, I was sitting across from David Ortiz, the branch manager at First National Bank, the same bank where Charlotte and I had opened her first checking account 18 years ago. I need to modify the access permissions on this joint account, I told him, sliding the paperwork across his desk. David reviewed the documents with professional efficiency. These account modifications will take effect immediately, Mr. Ross. You're establishing yourself as the primary account holder with approval requirements for large withdrawals. Perfect. Please notify me of any access attempts. He nodded, making notes in the system. Would you like to set specific withdrawal limits for the secondary account holder? Yes. $200 daily maximum. Anything larger requires my written approval. Charlotte would discover the restrictions the next time she tried to pay rent or buy groceries. The panic would be immediate, complete. After lunch, I found myself in the downtown office of James Parker, attorney at law. His diplomas covered one wall like certificates of competence, which I found reassuring. I invested $23,000 in improvements to that house over the past 5 years, I explained, showing him the receipts I'd carefully maintained. New roof, foundation work, kitchen renovation, all documented. James studied the paperwork with the thoroughness that justified his hourly rate. You have legal rights to this house, Mr. Ross. You've invested significant money in the purchase and improvements. Excellent, but first, I want them to understand their mistake themselves. He looked up from the documents, curiosity flickering in his professional expression. What do you mean? They took my house thinking I was helpless. I prefer they realize how wrong they were before I take legal action. That's an interesting approach, but your legal position is strong whenever you decide to proceed. Good. I'll be in touch when the timing is right. My final stop was the Oregon Department of Revenue building on Commercial Street. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, accepted my manila envelope without particular interest. Anonymous submission of potential tax irregularities. She confirmed, yes, Robert Miller, business owner. Documentation of unreported income, questionable deductions, and suspended business licenses. She stamped the envelope and filed it in a basket marked investigation required. Government bureaucracy would handle the rest with its own methodical precision. Back in my apartment by 5 o'clock, I poured myself a glass of wine, something I rarely did, but the occasion seemed to warrant celebration. Outside my window, Portland's evening lights began flickering on like tiny promises of what was to come. The first moves were in play. Charlotte would discover her financial restrictions within days. Robert's tax investigation would begin within weeks. Michael's gambling debts would compound with interest. I opened my laptop and began drafting the next phase. Monday morning arrived with the precise timing I'd engineered. My phone buzzed with a text notification from the bank. Someone had attempted to access the restricted account. Multiple attempts, actually. The timestamp showed 10:47 a.m. Charlotte had discovered her new reality. I poured coffee and opened my laptop, checking the bank's online activity log. 7 failed access attempts in 15 minutes. 2 phone calls to customer service. 1 request for immediate account review. All denied, as planned. My phone rang at 11:23. Charlotte's number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message with the satisfaction of an engineer watching a perfectly calibrated mechanism operate. Dad, It's Charlotte. There's some kind of problem with our account. The bank says you've restricted access. Please call me back immediately. This has to be a mistake. The second call came at 11:41, more desperate this time. Dad, where are you? I can't pay rent. I can't buy groceries. My card was declined at the coffee shop in front of my coworkers. Please, whatever this is, we need to fix it now. I made lunch while the third call played. Her voice cracked slightly on the word help. By afternoon, she'd apparently called Michael. My surveillance equipment, a basic listening device I'd placed near their bedroom window during a reconnaissance visit, picked up fragments of their conversation through the old house's thin walls. Dad's money is blocked. Charlotte's voice carried the sharp edge of genuine panic. How are we going to pay the mortgage? Michael's response came slurred with afternoon drinking. Stay calm, honey. We'll find a way out. Maybe we can sell something from the house. This can't be a coincidence. The bank says access was restricted by the account holder. Her voice rose with each word. That means Dad did this deliberately. You think your father... No, he wouldn't know how to do this. I smiled at that. Michael's underestimation would serve me well in the coming weeks. The mail arrived at 3:30. Among the usual bills and advertisements was an official envelope from the Oregon Department of Revenue, addressed to Robert Miller at his business address. The tax investigation had begun, triggered by my anonymous submission. Charlotte's phone rang at 4:15. I could hear her conversation through the device as she paced the kitchen of my former home. Robert, it's Charlotte. We have a problem, multiple problems actually. Her voice carried exhaustion now, the panic settling into grim determination. The tax office wants to audit your business records, and Dad has somehow locked us out of our bank account. Robert's response crackled through her phone speaker. That's impossible. Your father doesn't have that kind of authority. The bank disagrees. They say he's the primary account holder and can restrict access whenever he wants. A long pause, then Robert's voice much quieter. Where is your father now? I don't know. He won't answer his phone. His old neighbor says she hasn't seen him since he left. Another pause. Charlotte, what exactly did we walk into that night? She sank into the kitchen chair, Helen's old chair, and I could hear the creak of old wood through my listening device. I'm starting to think we severely underestimated him. Wednesday morning brought the systematic precision of Phase 2. I arranged Michael's compromising photographs across my kitchen table like evidence in a court case. 12 high-resolution images of my son-in-law with his auburn-haired colleague, captured outside her apartment building in her car at a downtown restaurant during what should have been working hours. Beside them, documentation of his gambling debts, casino receipts. Witness statements from bartenders, a pattern of financial irresponsibility stretching back months. 2 envelopes sat ready for delivery. One addressed to Henderson Development's Human Resources Department. One addressed to Charlotte at her office. By 10 o'clock, Michael's supervisor was reviewing an anonymous submission about employee gambling problems and questionable use of company time. The photos of Michael drinking during lunch hours, the documentation of his debts, the witness statements about his desperate promises to pay up when the house sells. Henderson Development prided itself on reliability and family values. Michael had become a liability. At 11:30, my listening device picked up Michael's panicked phone call to Charlotte from the Henderson parking lot. They fired me, his voice cracked through the surveillance equipment. Just like that, someone sent them information about my personal life. Charlotte's response carried the sharp edge of someone already stretched too thin. What kind of information? Pictures of me at the casino. Statements from people saying I owe money. They said I was a risk to company reputation. Michael, we can barely afford groceries. How are we going to survive without your paycheck? But that conversation was interrupted by the mail carrier's arrival at Charlotte's office. 2 hours later, my device captured a very different kind of conversation. I know about your affair, Michael. Charlotte's voice had gone deadly quiet. I want everything, half of everything we have left. The photographs had done their work. Charlotte, please let me explain. This isn't what it looks like. Photos don't lie, Michael. You've been sneaking around with some woman while I'm trying to hold our family together. Honey, I was desperate. The gambling got out of hand, and she was just... After what we did to my father. And now this? You're just like him. A disappointment. The irony wasn't lost on me, Charlotte comparing her cheating husband to the father she'd betrayed, not realizing that father was orchestrating her husband's destruction. Michael's voice turned desperate. This can't all be coincidence. First your dad's money gets locked up, then I lose my job. Now these photos show up. Someone's doing this to us. Who would even care enough to destroy us? The silence that followed was beautiful in its implications. Even through my surveillance device, I could hear the moment when realization began to dawn. Your father, Michael whispered finally. We threw out a man who spent 40 years learning how to solve problems methodically. Charlotte's laugh carried no humor. Dad couldn't organize a birthday party, let alone some elaborate revenge scheme. Then explain how our entire life fell apart in 1 week. I closed my laptop and poured myself an evening glass of wine. Michael was broken professionally and personally. Charlotte faced financial ruin and marital collapse simultaneously. Both were beginning to suspect the scope of their miscalculation. Tomorrow, I would begin Phase 3. Friday morning arrived with the predictability of engineering principles. They would come for me today, desperate, coordinated, convinced that intimidation could accomplish what planning had not. I arranged my legal documents in neat stacks across the kitchen table. Bank statements, property investment receipts, attorney correspondence, everything legitimate, everything defensible. At 10:30, the knock came. Officer Davis stood on my doorstep with the tired expression of someone handling a domestic dispute call. Behind him, I could see Margaret Miller, waiting in a patrol car, her face set in victorious anticipation. Mr. Ross, we received a complaint about you. His voice carried professional skepticism. The family says you've been threatening them. They want you to leave them alone. I opened the door wider, gesturing to the organized documentation. I haven't broken any laws, officer. I'm simply protecting my legal rights as an account holder and property investor. Davis examined the bank correspondence, the attorney letters, the investment receipts. His expression shifted from official concern to mild annoyance. These look legitimate. What exactly are they claiming you've done? Restricted access to my own bank account, consulted an attorney about my property investments, reported potential tax irregularities to the appropriate authorities. I handed him James Parker's business card. You're welcome to verify everything with my legal counsel. 20 minutes later, Officer Davis delivered the verdict to Margaret Miller that would ruin her morning. No evidence of criminal activity, no basis for a restraining order, no police protection for people facing legitimate legal consequences of their own financial choices. She spent the afternoon walking door to door through my old neighborhood, a one-woman campaign of social destruction. That man is dangerous, I heard her tell Mrs. Patterson through my surveillance equipment. He's threatening our family, trying to take our home away from us. Mrs. Patterson's response was predictably non-committal. Has he actually done anything illegal, Margaret? Well, no, but then maybe you should talk to him directly instead of involving the whole neighborhood. Margaret's manipulation campaign yielded similar results at each house. Neighbors who'd known me for decades weren't easily convinced that quiet Norman Ross had suddenly become a community threat. By 3 o'clock, Robert Miller had escalated to professional surveillance. Rick Stone, private detective, parked his unmarked sedan across from my apartment building with the subtlety of a man accustomed to insurance fraud cases, rather than systematic revenge operations. I photographed him from my window, noting his license plate and the telephoto lens he'd mounted for building surveillance, amateur hour. I'd been anticipating professional investigation since the day I moved into this strategically located apartment. His presence actually simplified my next moves. Let him document my routine: grocery shopping, library visits, coffee shops. Let him waste Robert Miller's remaining money on surveillance that would reveal exactly nothing illegal or threatening. My phone buzzed with a text from James Parker. Family attempted to file harassment complaint. Dismissed due to lack of evidence. All your activities remain within legal boundaries. Perfect. They were panicking exactly as I'd calculated. Desperate enemies make predictable mistakes, and the Miller family was proving that engineering principle beautifully. Their coordinated counterattack had accomplished nothing except confirming their complete misunderstanding of the situation. I wasn't their angry relative striking out in emotional rage. I was their systematic opponent, and Phase 3 was about to demonstrate the difference. Saturday morning brought an unexpected weight. I sat surrounded by the evidence of my complete victory. Bank statements showing Charlotte's restricted access, photographs documenting Michael's professional destruction, tax investigation notices targeting Robert's business empire. Everything I'd planned had worked with engineering precision, so why did I feel so empty? While organizing my filing cabinet, I discovered a manila envelope I'd forgotten packing. Helen's letters to me during our brief separation 40 years ago, when we'd argued about her mother's interference in our marriage. I opened the first letter with hands that remembered her handwriting better than her voice. My darling Norman, she'd written in her careful script, anger makes us do things we regret later. I know you want to prove a point to Mother, but proving you're right won't make either of us happy. The words hit harder than I'd expected. Helen had always seen through my engineering solutions to the human problems underneath. Even when she was furious with me, she never lost sight of what mattered. I read letter after letter, each one revealing her gentle wisdom about family conflicts and forgiveness. In one, she wrote, Norman, revenge never makes anyone happy, but justice is worth pursuing. There's a difference between making them pay and making things right. Making things right, the phrase echoed as I drove to Riverside Cemetery. Helen's grave sat under an old oak tree, her headstone simple granite with dates that encompassed 37 years of marriage. I'd avoided visiting since the funeral 6 months ago, but today I needed her guidance more than pride. What would you do, darling? I asked the headstone, feeling foolish but desperate. Would you forgive them or fight for justice? The wind rustled through the oak leaves, and I could almost hear her response. Not supernatural nonsense, just memory so clear it felt like conversation. You've already won, Norman. They know they can't intimidate you. They know they underestimated you completely. But destroying them won't bring our home back or heal Charlotte's selfishness. I traced her name carved in stone. I've destroyed them completely, but it doesn't feel like victory. Memory supplied her gentle laugh. Because you're not a destroyer, sweetheart. You're a builder. You've spent 40 years solving problems by creating solutions, not eliminating obstacles. The afternoon sun slanted through the branches, warming the granite beneath my fingers. Helen had always been right about these things. She'd seen me more clearly than I saw myself. The difference between my engineering mind and my father's heart. There's a difference between making them pay and making things right, I whispered, repeating her words from the letter. That evening, back in my apartment, I spread my legal documents across the kitchen table once more. But this time, I wasn't planning another systematic destruction. I was designing a different kind of solution, one that would restore justice without requiring vengeance. I opened my laptop and began typing a very different kind of document. A letter to James Parker about legitimate legal action for property recovery. Phase 3 would still demonstrate the difference between them and me, but it would demonstrate something Helen would be proud of. Monday morning arrived with the clarity Helen's guidance had provided. I arranged my documentation in 3 organized stacks: property investment records, financial evidence, and criminal documentation. Everything legitimate, everything systematic, everything legal. At 9:30, I sat across from Detective Sarah Johnson at the Portland Police Bureau. She reviewed my materials with the professional thoroughness of someone who'd seen plenty of family disputes turn criminal. Mr. Ross, you have sufficient evidence for criminal charges, she said, studying Robert Miller's tax documents. Financial fraud, tax evasion, potentially conspiracy to defraud you of property investments. I handed her the photographs of Michael's gambling activities. I want justice through proper legal channels, not personal revenge. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Most people in your situation would be screaming for blood. My wife taught me the difference between making people pay and making things right. Detective Johnson initiated the investigation immediately. By 11 o'clock, arrest warrants were issued for Robert Miller on tax evasion charges. The systematic approach that had served my private campaign now served legitimate justice perfectly. The emergency court hearing convened at 1 o'clock. Judge Williams, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, reviewed my property investment documentation with professional efficiency. Mr. Ross invested $23,000 in improvements to this residence over 5 years, James Parker explained to the court. He has legal standing as a property co-owner. Judge Williams examined the receipts, the contractor invoices, the bank statements. The house is returned to the rightful owner. Defendants must vacate within 48 hours. The gavel's bang echoed like an engineering solution clicking perfectly into place. By 3 o'clock, the eviction notice was served. I watched from across the street as the sheriff's deputy handed the official court order to Margaret Miller. Her face went through the same progression of emotions I'd seen 2 weeks ago: shock, anger, desperate calculation. But this time, she faced the full weight of legitimate authority, not just one wronged engineer. Charlotte emerged from the house, my house, carrying a suitcase with the mechanical movements of someone in emotional shock. Michael followed, his face carrying the hollow expression of a man who'd lost everything through his own choices. They loaded their car in silence. No arguments, no threats, no desperate attempts at manipulation, just the quiet acceptance of people who'd finally encountered consequences they couldn't intimidate, bribe, or charm their way around. At 5 o'clock, I stood in my own front doorway for the first time in 2 weeks. The house felt different, not because they'd changed anything, but because I'd changed everything. The afternoon light slanted through the kitchen window exactly as it had that first day when Charlotte called with her surprise. But now it illuminated justice, restored through proper channels, not revenge extracted through systematic destruction. I picked up Helen's crystal vase from the dining room table. It had survived their occupation undamaged, just as my sense of right and wrong had survived my temporary descent into vengeance. Tomorrow, Charlotte would face her own choices about how to rebuild a life without depending on money that was never really hers. Tonight, I was home. Friday morning arrived with the quiet satisfaction of justice properly served. I stood at the threshold of my house, my legally restored house, carrying only a single suitcase and 30 years of vindicated dignity. The locksmith had finished his work the previous evening. These were my keys now, legally and morally. The Miller family had left evidence of their hasty departure: food containers in the sink, magazines scattered across my coffee table, Charlotte's expensive face cream abandoned on the bathroom counter. They'd treated my home like a temporary hotel, never understanding they were occupying someone else's life. I spent the morning systematically erasing their presence, not out of anger, but with the methodical precision Helen would have recognized. Engineer's approach to restoration: assess damage, prioritize repairs, execute solution. The afternoon brought new locks, a security system, and fresh flowers for Helen's crystal vase. The house began remembering who it belonged to. At 3 o'clock, my phone rang. Charlotte's number. "Dad?" Her voice carried none of the entitled confidence I'd heard 3 weeks ago. "Can we talk?" I considered hanging up. Then I remembered Helen's lesson about the difference between justice and cruelty. "We're talking." I realize I was wrong. The words came haltingly, like admissions pulled from deep wounds. Everything's fallen apart. Michael's drinking again. The Millers blame me for Robert's arrest. I lost my job because I can't focus on anything. "I'm sorry to hear that, Charlotte." "Are you really?" The question caught me off guard with its naked honesty. Was I sorry? Or was I simply satisfied that consequences had arrived exactly as engineered? "Yes," I realized. "I'm sorry. Sorry it came to this. Dad, forgive me. Please, I know I hurt you, but I'm still your daughter." The silence stretched between us like the 18 days since she'd last called me family. "Charlotte, forgiveness is one thing, but trust is entirely different. You made your choice when you threw me out of my own home. Now live with it. I can't survive without my money," I finished gently. "You survived 34 years learning to depend on me for everything. Now learn to depend on yourself." "Dad, please. I spent 30 years giving you everything I had. My time, my money, my heart, my home. And the first moment it became convenient, you discarded all of it." I paused, watching the afternoon light slant through my kitchen window. That taught me something valuable about what I was protecting. The line went quiet, except for her breathing. Goodbye, Charlotte. I hung up. That evening I poured wine. Good wine, the kind I'd been saving for special occasions, and sat in Helen's favorite chair. The house felt different now, not just because the Miller family's presence had been erased, but because it contained something new, self-respect restored through legitimate channels. Helen, I said to the empty room, I did this right. Justice prevailed. I could almost hear her gentle laughter, feel her approval in the familiar creaks of our home settling around us. The systematic opponent had become something better, a man who'd learned the difference between winning and being right. Outside, Portland hummed with ordinary life. Inside, I began planning what to build next. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.